Welcome to The Connecting Point.
Well, good morning, everybody. Sorry about the little delay here. I didn't realize I was going to jump up so quick. And now I have to go like this. And we're going to wait for the technology to catch up. And I'm going to tell some jokes about technology and how the bane of our civilization. And it'll appear in a second. And when it does, I'll start again. Any second now. Okay. My name is Robert Carter. I'm going to do this. You know, I gave a talk once. I was it was on my doctoral research. And while I was giving my talk, my computer crashed, and I got the blue screen of death. Like that. And then it booted up. But I had borrowed a laptop from my office mate who was from Germany. It booted up in German Windows. So I was saying, on the next slide, what you would see is blah, blah, blah. And it's, I'm like, what is this? And so I'm like, okay, I think the third one down is probably da-da-da. And I'm going through translating German in my head as I'm getting my talk, as I'm talking about. Nothing worse could ever happen than that. So obviously, this is not a problem, and it's going to work great once something happens. Okay. So my name is Robert Carter. I am a scientist. But I'm going to tell you that the most important part of my life is that I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I work for an organization called Creation Ministries International out of our offices right here in Atlanta, in Powder Springs, actually. I've been doing this now for 11 years. This is going to be, around the world this year, one of about 1,200 churches that we're going to visit. There are about 30 of me on the speaking circuit, operating out of offices in 7 different countries. We're very busy. We produce all the books that you saw on the tables as you came in. We own Creation Book Publishers. We also produce probably 70 different DVD titles. We've made 3 documentaries in movie form, and the next one, Alien Intrusion, is going to hit the theaters in January. We're very excited about that because it's a major crossover product. People want to know about aliens, and oh my. In fact, but the last words of that documentary are Jesus Christ. It is a gospel presentation, and I really don't know what's happening here. Let's see. I'm plugged in, and I'm plugged in on this end. So, reboot my computer? Very well. Control-Alt-Delete. That's actually a good idea. Okay. Oh, there it is. This button over here. That's right. Windows keeps changing things. Okay. Restart. Here we go. Okay, force restart, close everything that's open, and all my work's getting lost right now. Oh, it's so sad. Logging off, shutting down. It is, oh man, tonight I'm going to be talking about the human genome and what an amazing computer system it is. And I'm going to compare the human genome to this bucket of bolts. This is, in the history of the universe, this is the most fascinating thing that mankind has ever made, called the computer. And despite billions of hours, because you know we're all beta testers, right? Those error reports we send in, billions, maybe trillions of hours of research and study and development, and this is the best we can do. Whew. And yet the computer, the human genome, is so shocking and so amazing and so complicated that not only does it not crash, it reproduces itself. Hence, you're all here. Let's see, I'm going to go to that folder and this folder and that folder, and my talk is right. I can't do 2 things at once. There's my talk. And we still, what? Oh yeah, let me do it. Why is it spinning? There we go. Boom, boom. I detect the second thing, just like before. I'm extended. I'm okay. Unplug it and plug it back in.
Yeah, let's give it a shot.
Here we go. If this doesn't work, I'm going to hand this to you, and we'll just plug it in back there, and we'll see what happens. It thinks it knows it's there. It really does. And why would it have worked before and not now? Because technology. Okay. Here, let me just hand it to you. Okay. There you go. Probably don't need that. If it starts saying, you're going to need this, the button there doesn't work anymore. Wow, that, 11 years of doing this, that has never happened before. Never once. I've had things happen. Like I gave a talk in a big Baptist church in Bentonville, Arkansas, and they had Macs. And they're like, oh, Carter, no problem. We'll just put your talk on our computer. It didn't work, and it didn't work, and it didn't work. And finally, the pastor was up here introducing me. And I said, sorry, guys. So I looked behind their computer. I pulled out their VGA. I stuck it in my computer. I hit run. I ran down the stairs, ran down the hallway, came up the side to the stage. Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Carter. And it worked, but my battery died on the last slide. So, things happen. This isn't bad. I'm at a loss. I should just have a Bible here, and I should just open it up and start preaching. But I don't have a Bible here. Okay, here we go. I don't know how long it's going to take, so I'm going to just start. We know that the Bible is complicated, right? We know that the Bible is challenging. We know that there are statements in the Bible that are profound. The first chapter of the Bible gives us actually a framework of history that is a direct challenge to everything we're hearing in our culture. That framework tells us that God did not create it over millions of years. And you know what? There are a lot of ways to express really long periods of time in Hebrew. That many of them are used in the first chapter of Genesis. Most of them we read, forward. Abraham, you're going to be the progenitor of lots and lots of people. And David, your line is going to go on forever. We can depict long periods of time in Hebrew. None of them are used in the first chapter of Genesis. Now, Christian, I'm sorry to tell you this. You're going to fix it? Phew. I'm sorry to tell you this, Christian, but you're going to have to deal with it. It doesn't have to be that way, but it is. All God had to do was add, and a lot of time happened. Or, here's a vague statement about time, and our lives would be a lot easier. Because if that was in the Bible, oh, look at that. Ooh. Okay. Why is it purple?
Yeah, that's another issue.
Okay, we're going purple today. Woohoo. Thank you so much. All right, now I'm just going to start. I got all the time in the world. Oh, this is awesome. Even with all that delay, I still have plenty of time. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. My name is Robert Carter. I am a speaker for Creation Ministries International. I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad we had this time of communication briefly. Now, I am a scientist. I'm a marine biologist by training. Actually, a coral reef ecologist is the title of my doctorate. But after years of scuba diving in Florida and Bahamas, I lost count after 500. I don't know how many times I've been underwater. It was a tough life. But I ended up in the genetics lab. And when I managed to steal the genes that code for these bright green and bright red protein pigments in these animals and engineer them into these fish, I was granted my doctorate. Yes, I made the Frankenfish. But that opens up a can of worms, doesn't it? How can the Christian operate in the world of science today when there's a moral question around every corner? It is a challenge. We are able to ask moral questions in science today that we as a society are not able to answer. Like, what are you going to do the first time someone clones a human being? Are you ready for that? I don't think we're ready for that. So what do we do? How do we find a guide for science? And is there a scriptural guide? Absolutely, there is absolutely a scriptural guide for science. And it starts on the first page of your Bible. Genesis chapter 1, God talking to Adam and Eve. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Wait a minute. That right there says that God put Adam and Eve on this earth as stewards of the world. Well, guess what? We're their descendants. We would have inherited that responsibility. But wait a second. To be a steward means to be a caretaker. To take care of something means you must understand that something, right? But the pursuit of understanding is called science. The purpose of science is to fulfill our role in God's created order. And as we discover more about what God created, to give glory to Him. That is, or should be, the purpose of science. We've been writing about how science and the Bible work together for 40 years. In fact, our 40th anniversary issue has been completed, and it's coming out very soon. Creation Magazine. Interestingly, for me, I was introduced to Creation Magazine at Wyuka Road Baptist Church in Atlanta, probably 1989. I'm not sure if I was a believer. I certainly was not a creationist. I thought the people giving the presentation were a bit kooky, and now I am one. I think that God used Creation Magazine to help me study myself into Christianity, because I had a lot of questions, and this family magazine for this nerdy scientist guy answered a lot of those questions. Now, as little subliminal hints, I'm going to pop up Creation Magazine throughout my talk, just to show you that all the information I'm about to give you, almost all of it, I actually learned in Creation Magazine since about 1990. We also have a gigantic website called creation.com. It's a very important part of the internet real estate. It's very popular. And we've got, somewhere in the neighborhood of 9,000 or 10,000 articles. So if you have a question, go to our website. There's a little search box. Type in some keywords. I can almost guarantee that we'll have an answer to that question on our website. And if not, you can send us an email. We'll answer it, and very often those answers turn into new articles. But you'll notice some of our articles deal with a cultural battle that's happening in the Western world today. And I want to start off with an illustration of this cultural battle. How many of you have heard of Billy Graham? Great. How many of you have heard of his good friend, Charles Templeton? Oh, that's pretty good. That's more than normal. It's really kind of funny because back in the day, Charles Templeton was a famous guy. Billy Graham was the other guy. That's a picture of Charles preaching to a stadium full of people. Do you know what I would give to preach to a stadium full of people? But before that man died, he writes this book called Farewell to God, My Reasons for Rejecting the Christian Faith. That world-famous evangelist died an atheist. And in that book, he details the specific reasons for rejecting Christianity. He claims there's unanswered questions about the age of the universe. You ever wonder about that? How about the existence of ape men? Has that ever challenged your faith? How about where did all the flood waters go when Noah's flood was finished? You ever wonder how that works? This guy claims the Bible can't answer those questions, therefore the Bible is wrong. But you know what's terrifying to me, or humbling anyway? When I was 18, 19, 20 years old, I had that same list of questions. And most of my friends who had those questions along with me are not walking with God today, including one particular person on Facebook that I went to church with growing up, and if I mention God, he'll swear at me. Yeah, welcome to America. You understand the world you live in, right? But we've got more information on this topic than any other time in church history. We should be shouting, the Bible is history, from the rooftops. And yet most people in America have never, ever heard anyone defend Christianity. How do I know that? Because I was 19 and I was raised in church, and I never heard anyone share with me, the Bible is true, here's the gospel. And the first person I ran into was here in Georgia. I was 1,000 miles away from home. I liked this girl, so I went over. She invited me over to her house for dinner, and her mom talked to me until 2 o'clock in the morning. That was the first time I'd ever heard anyone who actually believed the Bible, and I thought she was crazy. And I insulted her. And I said, oh, come on, evolution's a fact. Most people in our culture, when challenged, will bring up evolution, millions of years, deep time, something like that, to show that the Bible is not true. I'm guessing it probably happens in 8 out of 10 conversations. But do you feel equipped to handle those questions? most people don't feel equipped. And yet, when we look at the statistics, this is different surveys trying to figure out how many kids that grow up in church are going to leave after they get 18, 19, 20 years old. Now, if you think this is just liberal denominations, that 88% comes from the Southern Baptist Sunday School Board. That is a tremendous falling away. Now, I don't know what the actual number is, but it's high. Now, how many of you know somebody, went to church, may have been baptized, may have made a profession of faith, may have gone on a missions trip, might have been really active in youth group, and they hit that age of college and become an atheist, an agnostic, a skeptic? Do you know people like this? So are we talking about somebody else's friends or our friends? We are talking about people we know. So therefore, I'm going to conclude already. This is an important subject. This world is messed up. And I tell you what, I am really glad I'm not 18 years old today. Because when I was younger, in fact, you people that are older than me, I'm 48 this year, you people that are older than me, you grew up in a world where atheism was like, if you were an atheist, you were a social pariah in most cultures, most areas of the culture. Today, you're celebrated. Let me give you an example of the pressure young people are facing. Hey, you all know who Ricky Gervais is, the comedian? He's got a routine. You can see it on YouTube. He's got an audience full of people, probably 2,000 people in this big audience hall. And yet they're all laughing and laughing and laughing. In the middle of that, he goes, and now we're going to bring out the Bible. And he brings up a Bible. He opens to the first page. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Ha, 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 ha. He doesn't make any comment at all. He just reads the first chapter or two, and his audience is hysterically laughing the whole time. Welcome to America. It is a different world today. Everything has changed so quickly. The Christians are sitting there going, I can't believe this. 5 years ago, this never would have happened. How do we engage our culture is the question. But I remember being younger, and I remember having evidence that evolution was an absolute fact in my mind. In fact, this was the thing that nailed evolution in my brain. It was called Pakicetus. That's the whale from Pakistan. Look at how the artist depicted it. It's a half land, half aquatic animal making that perfect transition, and I saw the bones. Oh, that's all the bones they had. And then I remember, in fact, in this conversation with that lady, I said, evolution is a fact. She goes, how do you know that? I said, that walking whale that was they just published. And she goes, oh, no. Don't you know they just discovered the rest of the skeleton? And sure enough, it looks more like a 6-foot-long rat than it does a whale. The interpretation was radically different than the facts on the ground. And I looked at this and I said, what else have they lied to me about? And that right there started me on a lifelong quest of finding different answers than what I was being taught in my science classes. But we want to reach people. And honestly, most of us are not scientists, right? Some of you probably have nightmares of high school chemistry. Okay, so put that aside. You don't have to be a scientist to do this. What I'm going to attempt to do is I'm going to attempt to give you a couple of really big ideas that you can use when you talk to people. We have to be able to give someone an alternative to the thing that's tripping them up. And we're called to do it, but most of us don't feel equipped to do it. So part of today is trying to equip you to be able to engage people in a more powerful way. A good way to start is take a look at our email newsletter. Once a week, we'll put together something interesting or informative, something exciting, maybe some new product or some new development in science. Maybe we'll even have an interview with a former evolutionist. We're going to put out something interesting, exciting, challenging. It's something designed to help you engage with other people. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't talk to people about something I learned or thought about last week or last year. I tend to talk about the things that are on the tip of my brain, the front of my brain. Something I just talked about. Hey, did you know this? Or someone throws something at me, and providentially, very often, someone will say something that a week before I would have no way of knowing how to answer, and yet I had just read something. Wait a second. And I can share it with them. Because I'm trying to keep up with things. Now, if you're interested in this, this is what our sign-up form looks like. You don't have to sign up. It's all right. But when it goes past you, please pass it to the person next to you. When it's finished, can you pass them to the end of the row? Because my volunteers here are going to collect them afterwards, and I'd appreciate that. Okay, those are going around. Thank you, guys. And we're talking about science. But when I use that word, most people think of a specific type of science called operational science. That deals with observing and testing and repeating today. That type of science has led to development of all of our modern technology, including this nuclear-powered rover driving around Mars today. But you know, interestingly, this type of science is pioneered by Christians. Men like Johann Kepler, who has an amazing testimony of his own. And he said his work was like thinking God's thoughts after him. What did he do? Oh, he just discovered the 3 laws of planetary motion that NASA used to get that rover to Mars. But if you rattled off a list of early modern scientists, you would be rattling off a list of people who believe the Bible. Okay, we all struggled in science class. Remember those formulas with all those symbols? Well, every time a symbol is a letter, most of those letters are the initials of a Christian's name. What? Absolutely true. They don't teach you that in history or science classes, but it's absolutely true. And the interesting thing is, this developed under Christian philosophy. Why did modern science come out of Christianity? I'll tell you 2 reasons. One, the Bible tells us to study. The Bible commands us to study. It's not a religion you just walk into and numb your brain. It's a thinking person's religion. If you've ever read anything the Apostle Paul wrote, you have to think through that, right? He uses logical statements. If, and, or, therefore, but, not. And he'll string those things together into this really long argument that you've got to work through. Those are logical statements. Second, the Bible describes an all-powerful genius creator God, right? Who's not fickle, right? The Bible says there's no shadow of turning with him. He doesn't change his mind on a whim. That constant God would have created a universe that operates with constancy. The eternal God, the ultimate lawgiver, would have created a universe that operates according to law. That religious, philosophical proposition led to the discovery of what we call now scientific law. Why does the universe operate according to law? Because God. Why does the evolutionist say, believe the universe operates according to law? Because stuff happens. Philosophically, we have a more superior position because we can explain why things are. They just have to start with, well, they are. Now, this gets into another realm of science very quickly. There's another branch of science. It's called historical science. But think of history. We're dealing with one-off events that happened in the remote past that no one was there to witness. It's not observable, it's not testable, and it's not repeatable. History happens once. So we're not arguing over the strength of gravity or the boiling point of water. That's operational science. We're arguing over were Neanderthals a dead-end branch of humanity. That's a history question. And this whole entire creation-evolution debate is centered around historical questions. So, history for you. This is a test. I shouldn't have said history for you. I should have said this is a test. I might have given away the answer just by saying that. Okay, science class. Class, here's a test. The question is, true or false? What's your answer? Dead dinosaur sinks to the bottom of an ocean. He rots, and over a long period of time, his bones are buried and petrified, and over millions of years, plate tectonics lifts up those rocks. Erosion now exposes a dead dinosaur. True or false? How do you know? What kind of science is this? Is this operational science or historical science? Yes, it's a model of history. It's an idea of something that happened in the past. But here's the problem. I know you do this. I know I do this. When I see something that kind of makes sense, and that makes sense to me, I can imagine that happening, it sticks in my head as being true, even if it's not. We can demonstrate this isn't true. That museum display is absolutely nonsense, because dead things sitting on the bottom of the ocean get eaten. And according to the laws of chemistry, bones dissolve in seawater. You see, science has to explain things like this. That fish looks like he was petrified before he rotted. And this. And this. Do you see the baby ichthyosaur there? Was Mama Ichthyosaur lying on the bottom of a warm Mesozoic sea for a long period of time as she's slowly buried in fine silt with a baby half born? And there's no evidence of anything being eaten or the bones decaying? No, she had to be buried rapidly or this fossil wouldn't be there. Or this one. That's a salamander. How can the gills and that thin tail of that salamander be turned to stone? I don't know. But does millions of years of geology have an answer to that? Because to get it, I know at least it had to be buried quickly, and the preservation must have started before the tissue began to decay, or it would not be there. Right? Well, would you like a historical model, maybe from Scripture, or maybe a biblical historical model of how this might happen? Here's Goldie. He's swimming along, and suddenly he gets overwhelmed by an underwater avalanche caused by Noah's flood. Now what happens? Well, now he's dead. But he's buried in mud, and as the mud dries out, any salts or minerals that are dissolved in the water are going to crystallize. And if we do that quick enough, we might replace parts of his body with this crystal-y stuff. We call it a fossil. Now, in my dinosaur talk, you learned that not everything has been preserved that way. Not all fossils are petrified. Shocking. But here's how we might petrify something. We have a documentary out on the tables there. I'm very proud of this. This is 3 years of my life. We have won 2 major awards at Christian film festivals for Evolution's Achilles Heels. In fact, at the San Antonio Christian Film Festival, there were 13 Christian documentaries, and we were number 2. We lost to Mike Huckabee. But I don't care. I'm very happy about that. What we did was, in Evolution's Achilles Heels, we went to PhD scientists who were also Bible believers. We said, okay, Mr. Nerdy Scientist, tell us, according to your area of expertise, what can evolution not answer? What a powerful question. We call them Evolution's Achilles Heels. We had Dr. Marcus Ross. He's a paleontologist, a fossil expert. And he says the existence of a fossil is actually proof that something happened very, very fast. But then he says, but the fossil happened fast. The rock that contained the fossil must also have occurred quickly. Now what happens? The entire fossil record is a record of rapid processes, not slow. Including things like this tree that sticks up through what? How much time is in the evolutionary history there? At least tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years? I don't know. But that tree is defying evolutionary time, because trees don't stick about the forest for thousands of years after they die. They rot, they burn, they get pecked at, they fall over. This is called a polystrate, a many-layered fossil. We have fossils like this in fossil layers all over the world that all of them are saying no to the time. But look what I'm doing. All the examples I just gave you are designed to question time, because that is the key. Millions of years came more than 50 years before Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species. Biological evolution requires millions of years. It must come first. So instead of just attacking evolution, let's actually attack the entire structure, because it all comes crumbling down together. But where does the millions of years idea come from? Why do scientists start thinking this? Okay, follow me here. Look at Grand Canyon. Look at how big it is. Measure the erosion rate in that desert. It's very slow. Therefore, it took millions of years to form Grand Canyon. What did I just do? I just mixed operational historical science. I took an observation today and a measurement today, and I extrapolated to millions of years. But what if millions of years geology doesn't explain this? For example, millions of years erosion would never leave a vertical cliff behind. Cliffs should always do that. Oh, if millions of years geology can't explain it, they've got big problems. You remember a couple months ago, last winter, the highest dam of the United States nearly burst. They had massive problems. This is the Oroville Dam in California. On the world scale, this is only a little bit of water over just a little bit of drop, and it only flowed for a couple of days. But it pulverized rock. You see that gravel bar there in the river? That was the rock that was underneath the dam, and that thing that was etched. That canyon that was built is more than 100 feet wide, more than 100 feet deep, and a couple hundred feet long of solid rock. Water doesn't erode rock. Oh, yeah, it does. I went down to the Florida Keys a couple weeks ago to speak at a couple Baptist churches there, and oh, yes, it was lobster season. Oh, it took me 4 hours to get from the airport to the northern Keys, and it's supposed to be an hour drive. Oh, but I was stuck on the overseas highway behind a boat, and I'm trying not to smash into the motor of the boat every time we stop. And I'm staring at the propeller of this boat, which is made of stainless steel, and I notice the back edge all pitted. From what? Not salt water. From a process called cavitation, the same process that did that. See, when water is flowing over a surface, if it runs into an irregularity, it will pop up and create a vacuum. And that process of cavitation will eat into rock as if it's powder. Oh. All of a sudden, we don't need millions of years to explain massive amounts of erosion. We just need water to hit a certain critical speed, which we know happens in the real world under real-world conditions. Which gives me another opportunity to talk about myself, which I love to do. Yeah, that's me, 10 years old. This is I'm 12 years old. May of 1980. I'm living in a beach town in New York State. I grew up at a marina. I spent my summers on the water. I'm a beach bum, which is why I became a marine biologist. I could be a professional beach bum. But I remember at the end of that year being amazed by all these brilliant red sunrises. And from my house, we could see the sun rising over the ocean. Brilliant red ball of fire. Because there was a mountain 3,000 miles from my house that exploded and was affecting the weather on the other side of the continent. Mount St. Helens gives us an amazing testimony that a lot of geology can happen in a short amount of time. Here in this exposure, there's a woman on the bottom there for scale. We can see 3 different layers that were laid down by the volcano. The initial eruption, May of 1980, boom, splat. That much material was deposited. Then, this is miles from the volcano, by the way. A month later, a boiling hot cloud of steam and volcanic ash came racing down the mountain at hurricane speed and deposited that middle layer. And then 2 years later, a big mud flow came down the mountain, deposited the upper layer, and carved the canyon. And if we zoom up at that middle layer, wow, we see stuff like this all over in the fossil record. But this is not millions of years. Any geologist before that would have seen this and would have said, count up the layers, count up the years, slow and gradual, millions of years. This is minutes. This is ash falling out of the sky, making these layers. But it's really interesting. But that means that Mount St. Helens gives the key to unlocking some huge problems in geology, because this is not historical science. We saw this happen. We watched it. We measured it. But if it doesn't take millions of years to form some rocks, how old is the earth? And where do we look for an answer? Well, if we look at the Bible, we must conclude the Bible claims to be the history book of the universe. Whether it's true or not is something for you to figure out. I believe it is now. And in that history book of the universe, we have God doing an amazing creation event in a very short window of time, just a few thousand years ago, and it claims that he creates everything in the universe. He creates light. He separates a big ball of water into the waters above and the waters below. He creates land and fills it with plants. He creates the sun, moon, and stars, and all the swimming creatures, and all the flying creatures, and all the land animals, and eventually he creates man. Hey, Christian, does that embarrass you? I was terrified of this passage because I know what it means. And I tried to fit evolution in here every way I could. I tried to stretch the days out into long periods of time. That didn't work when someone pointed out that means the sun came millions of years after plants. I tried to make this a record of evolutionary history. That didn't work when someone pointed out that whales are supposed to evolve from land animals, and the Bible says that whales would have came before land animals. There's a problem there. I couldn't do it. Now, if you're struggling with this and you're trying to add evolution to this, I want to encourage you to keep trying. Seriously, keep trying. Bash your head against that wall. It's not going to move. Now, the reason that I'm talking about this, why all this evolution stuff is important for Christianity, is because of the way the New Testament treats the book of Genesis. We have to realize that there are more than 100 references to Genesis in the New Testament. The New Testament is not very fat. And half of those, in fact 60 of them, come from the first 11 chapters. What's the first 11 chapters of the Bible? Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, and the Tower of Babel. Chapter 12 is Abraham. Every single New Testament author references these passages. Jesus himself, at least 16 times in the Gospels, including his famous discourse on marriage and divorce, where he says in Mark chapter 10, "But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Did Jesus believe that Adam existed at the beginning of creation? Think about this. Could Adam have existed at the Big Bang? In the parallel passage, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and he says, "Have you not read?" As in, I believe it, you say you believe it, this is what it says. How come so many times we read this and try to say, oh, but that's not what it means? I understand most people don't accept Genesis as history, and I understand a lot of Christians don't either. But there is a difficult, maybe even a danger in this. Look what Jesus tells Nicodemus the Pharisee. John chapter 3. You know John 3:16, right? You know John chapter 3. Nicodemus says, "Can a man be born again?" And Jesus says, "If I've told you earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things?" Well, I believe that one of the main reasons why Christianity is struggling to remain relevant in our culture today is that most people have decided the earthly things in the Bible are nonsense. Earthly things, that's the science and the history. And therefore, when those guys who wrote the Bible over all those years, since they didn't know what they were talking about anyway, obviously they made up that spiritual stuff too. And the spiritual baby gets thrown out with the earthly bathwater. And we've seen that happen many, many times. But the Bible is consistent in its treatment of Genesis as a foundational document. Look what Paul says in Romans 5. "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man," who's that man? Adam. "And death through sin, and so death spread to all men, because all sinned." Now, put aside the idea of animal death. I don't think there was animal death before Adam. Just put that aside. We're talking about the death of people. If evolution is true, there's millions of years of the death of people before Adam came to existence. In fact, Adam's father would have been called Homo sapiens, and his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and they were all dead by this point. The Bible says that death did not start until Adam rebelled against God. If that's true, evolution is impossible, because death is the engine of evolution. We get this idea that death is a punishment for sin in the second chapter of Genesis. "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. From the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." But what did Adam do? He reached out and he ate the fruit of that tree. Therefore, death comes from man's rebellion against God. Let's parse this a little bit here, though. Did Adam die on that day? No, so the Bible's wrong. This is, by the way, this is the promise of physical death. Somebody, he just died spiritually. No, this is a promise of physical death. But the Bible says Adam lived for 930 years. Well, in Hebrew, it does not say he will die instantly. In English, it's hard to translate. In Hebrew, the word death is used twice. It's something like, Adam, in dying you will die. Or the moment you rebel against me, the process of death will start and you will eventually die. That's what it says, and that's why there's not a giant contradiction here. But Adam did it, and because of that, God says, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. But it's not the dirt that's cursed, it's the universe. Look at Romans 8 here. Multiple references to creation. For the creation waits with eager longing. For the creation was subjected to futility, and hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption. The whole creation, the Greek word there is katasis, it basically means everything. It's like the universe, if you like. The whole creation is groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. He keeps harping on the fact that the entire universe, all of creation, is weighed down by the weight of Adam's sin. And it affects all of us today. That's my living room floor. That's 5-inch wide quarter-sawn red oak. I took it from a 90-foot tall tree the Beatles had killed. It took me 2 years to make my floor. I'm very proud of this. I love woodworking. It is a passion of mine. There's my boy there sitting on Daddy's sawmill, and it's a lot of fun. But you know, it's also kind of dangerous because to run a sawmill, you have to run a chainsaw. And I don't know, I've probably cut up 100 trees. I've probably worked on chainsaws for 1,000 hours. I don't know. Well, I call this Rob's right leg's memorial stump because I nearly cut my leg off. Now, anyone run a chainsaw? You see what I did? That was stupid. I cut it this way first before I cut it that way. Worse, I was tired. I just recovered from the flu. Double worse, I was cutting left-handed. And so I wasn't used to controlling it with my left hand. Well, that large block, I couldn't fly away because I left half the stump there. And it was too heavy to fly away. It just slid forward, pinched the front of the blade. Pow! Oh, wow. You know bones are white? If this was 100 years ago, it's a guaranteed amputation because you die of gangrene from shredding wounds. In fact, my wife was putting the kids in the car. They're going to the library. If she wasn't home, I don't know that I would be alive today. Now, I'm guessing a lot of you have near-death experiences of some sort. Tell you what, if you're a Christian, the reason that you're alive right now is because God has a purpose for you in His kingdom today. When your purpose is fulfilled, you're going to die. But for the promises that we've been given, that should be okay. But if you're not a Christian, I suspect that there are people in this room that have been praying for you that one day you would bow your knee to your Creator. Because what a wonderful position when we realize that the only reason we exist is because of grace. But there is a hope for us. Look at the end of the Bible. Revelation 21. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things are passed away. What's all the former things? It's all the junk we got from Adam. How do I know that? Because in the last chapter of the Bible, Revelation 22, it says, there's no more curse. Ooh, that comes from Genesis chapter 3. And then the tree of life reappears. Oh. You ever realize that the end of the Bible is fixing the problem set up in the beginning of the Bible? They're like two bookends on a very consistent story. You know what that is? That black squiggly line there, those are all the chapters in the Bible. That rainbow, those are all the cross-references amongst all the chapters in the Bible. You can't pull Genesis out of that without destroying the integrity of the rest of Scripture. But if Genesis is true, then the earth really is only a few thousand years old. How do you fit the fossil record into that short amount of time? Well, you remember the Mount St. Helens example, right? A lot of geology can happen in a short time under the right conditions. What if something even larger happened in Earth's history? Now, of course, we're talking about Noah's flood. About 1,600 years after Adam rebelled against God, there's a man named Noah. And Genesis 6 says, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me. For the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Essentially, God got fed up with sin and said, I'm going to reboot the world. So he tells Noah to build a large ship. We call it an ark. And in the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, the 17th. Okay, look, I know not all of you are scientists, So you people who like languages, not me. You people who got straight A's in English, not me. Would you please tell me, what genre is this writing? Is this poetry, prophecy, allegory, or historical narrative? Did the author of Genesis intend for us to think that a specific thing happened on a specific day of a specific person's life? Why on earth would he have written it that way if he didn't mean that? If you look in the Bible for other places where grammatical uses of words and word constructions and stuff like that look like this, you're in, maybe 1 Chronicles or Kings. You're not in Psalms. You're not in Ezekiel. This is written like the history books. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Cool. Did that really happen, though? Well, come on. The whole world is covered in water. Well, everywhere I go today, I'm looking for evidence of Noah's flood. And I believe we can see it if we think through it carefully. But here's a big idea for you. Here's a big idea for you. Think about what rapidly rising, muddy water is going to leave behind. And if we're flooding continents, think of the scale of the deposits that we directly predict from Noah's flood. Now, when the flood waters start coming off the continents, think of what's going to happen. Massive amounts of water flowing not in rivers, but in massive sheets across massive continental surfaces should erode a lot of rocks. And then maybe leave some really strange things behind. You've seen Monument Valley in Utah. You ever realize that this is a massive testimony to Noah's flood? First of all those buttes and mesas have the same height. They're eroded from a plain. But these rocks, just northeast, south, and west of here, go underneath other rocks. There's a mile of missing rocks here. And then we have all these vertical cliffs. But wind and rain and freezing and thawing, especially lightning strikes, are rounding these things off. Nothing today is creating this landform. Therefore, anything happening today can't explain the landform. Therefore, the present is the key to the past? Yeah, it is. And because we can't explain this in the present, something different must have happened in the past. Notice there's no big pile of boulders at the base of these things. Where's all the sand? It's been washed off the continent. Now, apply those thoughts to Grand Canyon. First, can you see a bunch of thin, flat layers stacked up like pancakes? Can you see all the erosion between the layers? No, the top layer has lots of erosion. It's called the canyon. But you got to understand, most of the time in the fossil record, according to the evolutionist, is in the gaps between those layers. Just underneath that light stripe, they say there's a 20 to 30 million year gap. There's a 100 million year gap down towards the bottom, the 1.2 billion year gap. In quotes, all those years. But look what happens with erosion over just a short time frame. I mean, evolutionists, they don't think Grand Canyon is billions of years old. They think it's millions of years old. In fact, if you just measure the amount of mud being washed out the Mississippi River and you extrapolate backwards, the entire continent would be erased down to sea level in 8 million years. This can't be millions of years old. It wouldn't exist. It was carved during Noah's flood. But we have to understand that the flood is not a gentle thing. This is not a kid's story. This is a horror story. This is the wrath of God poured out on wickedness. And think about it. Only 8 people survived, and they're sitting in that boat knowing that everyone that they knew died a horrible and brutal and rapid whatever death. Yuck. But there's a beautiful picture here? Because Noah is a picture of Christ. Through faith in God, Noah came through the waters of death and came out alive on the other side. The New Testament tells us that anyone who puts their faith in Jesus Christ will be brought through the second death, that final judgment of God, and come out alive on the other side to inherit eternal life in heaven. How do you get to heaven? How do you survive the wrath of God? Through faith, just like Noah. But we have to understand also the ark is huge. If you divided up the internal space of that vessel into like railroad cars. In fact, I did this. I figured out the volume of it, and I added some wood in there for thickness, and I said, okay, now how many railroad cars would that take up? My train was 5 miles long. There is plenty of room inside that vessel for 2 of every kind of animal, and it's only a few thousand pairs at most, plus all the food and water they need for an entire year. But there's something else interesting. Noah's Ark happens to be perfectly stable. There's some naval architects that study Noah's Ark, and they published a paper in 1994. They said, that's amazing. The length to width to height ratio of Noah's Ark is optimally designed for stability on rough seas. But you know, Noah's Ark is the same size and shape as a modern ocean-going ship, because that shape is the best shape. If you make it longer, shorter, taller, fatter, the boat rocks more. Now, today they do make them longer because they have to fit through the Panama Canal. So engineers are deliberately making ships that rock more than they have to because of the design constraints of the canal. Wait a second. How did that formula appear in the Bible? We didn't discover it until the 1800s, and it was an accident. Someone built a really big paddle wheel steamer, and they said, man, this thing is really stable. We should make more ships like this. You've seen like the Nina Pinta in Santa Maria, right? They're like little corks floating on the ocean. Talk about seasick. Oh, those things would have bobbed like crazy. Another example. I was at the British Museum a couple years ago. It was for the opening of our Evolution's Achilles Heels. We actually had it in a giant Baptist church. There was like 700 or 800 people there. And it was just a couple of blocks from Buckingham Palace and Parliament. And they filled it up. It's amazing. But while we were there, I got to go to the British Museum, and I saw the clay tablet has the Babylonian flood story on it. Now, I don't read cuneiform scripts, but the translation was there, and sure enough, their ark was a cube. A cube is the stupidest possible shape for an ocean-going ship. You've probably heard that the ancient Israelites copied other stories from other cultures, and they made this mythology called Genesis. You've probably heard that. Yeah, the problem is the evidence actually goes the other direction. The Babylonian is a copy because their story is ridiculous. The Bible is the original because that's scientifically accurate. That's cool. Now, I've given you a lot of examples of beautifully preserved animals. I think they're wonderfully consistent with Noah's flood. Here's one more. It's a jellyfish. Question: how do you turn a jellyfish to stone? Great question. Second, but there are jellyfishes that look just like this jellyfish swimming in today's oceans, unchanged. But the date, they say this thing is 505 millions of years ago. That's a problem, because Charles Darwin said that things change. And the evolutionist believes that the environment has radically changed. Now, how long is 500 million years in evolutionary history? It's like, the federal debt. It's so big, there's so many zeros on that you can't even get your brain around it, right? In evolutionary history, what's 500 million years? Well, if this was today, this would be the middle of the Cambrian era, where they believe multicellular life was first evolving. And that this thing remained unchanged throughout the entire evolutionary history of life on Earth. From the end Permian extinction event, was supposedly 99% of the oceans, things on land and in the oceans died, to the big meteor that killed off the dinosaurs, to the evolution of sea turtles, whose favorite food is jellyfish. The world today is radically different than the world where they believe that this thing first lived. How could it not change? Now, see, I have a problem with this, because evolution on one hand can explain 500 million years of no change, and on the other hand, one of this guy's cousins turned into things like bumblebees and wombats. I cannot defend. If evolution can explain everything, it's not science. It's a philosophy of history. And it actually devolves into a philosophy. And that's exactly what it is, and it has been masquerading as science for a very long time. Oh, but science changes quickly. You've seen pictures of Neanderthal man. That charcoal picture there, they made his face stick out more to make him look more like a monkey. The skeleton here in New York Museum of Natural History, why are both of his knees bent? Because it makes him look more like a monkey. from the hips down, he looks just like you. He would have walked just like you. Now, the rib cage is shaped a little different. Their bones are thicker. Their muscles would have been stronger. Their teeth have thicker enamel. And these guys are tough. In fact, their brains are bigger than ours. Who's superior to whom in that picture? They believe Neanderthal man buried their dead with their heads pointed towards sunrise, made musical instruments on a pentatonic scale out of deer antlers, had the controlled use of fire, searched the landscape for rocks to grind them up to make cosmetics. This is not the Neanderthal man I grew up with. Everything's changing quickly. And now we enter the world of genomics. You ever see a show where they take a skull and they put clay and hair and eyeballs on the skull and say, "What does a person really look like?" I love those shows. Those are really cool. Well, that's what happens when you do that to about a 10-year-old Neanderthal fossil they found in Europe. Does that look like a half a monkey to you? No, it looks like a little boy. Why does he have green eyes and freckles and light hair and light skin? Because of genetics. Because we now know, because we can pull DNA out of some of the best preserved Neanderthal bones, we know that they carried variants that when similar things happen in modern people, they cause things like light hair and green eyes. Better than that, we've now sequenced the genomes of probably a dozen Neanderthals and other ancient people. And that's a shocker. There should be no DNA in those bones. The fact there's any DNA at all means they're not millions of years old. In fact, Neanderthal will only be tens to hundreds of thousands of years old, but they're not that old because the DNA would not be there. But when they sequenced the DNA and they looked at the genome of the Neanderthal, oh my, everything you heard about Neanderthal more than 10 years ago is wrong. They are people. I had my DNA looked at by one of those genetic ancestry companies. I am 3% Neanderthal, typical European. That doesn't sound like a lot, right? Until you realize that for every 100 of my ancestors, 3 of them were Neanderthal. Who are these people? They're a group of people that got up into Europe after Noah's flood. They're the first people in Europe. They became essentially Europe's first racial group, if you would. But then a larger group of people came in with farms. And they had more children because they had more food. A larger population, and they overwhelmed the Neanderthals. But because people are people and birds and bees, and you can explain that to your children later if you want to, guess what happened? More than half of the Neanderthal genome is right here in this audience. So it wasn't just one time, it happened a lot. The two populations intermated. But if two populations intermate, that means they're the same species. By definition. Neanderthal is Homo sapiens. Which allows me to get to my last scientific slide. This also gives us a model of explaining human races. We do not need millions of years. We do not need common ancestors with chimpanzees. All we need is God to put a little bit of genetic diversity into Adam and Eve, and as that genetic diversity gets sorted over time, we can get differences between people. And then add a little bit of mutation. Yeah, you blue-eyed people, you're mutants. I used to have red hair. Mutation. Happens only in Scotland and Ireland. Light skin, mutation. All we need is a little bit of tiny little changes over time. So back up that a little bit. Let's not even talk about the mutation. Let's talk about these two people, these two adults. Each one of them is of mixed race. They have a black father and a white mother. They had these non-identical twin girls. One of them got all the color genes from the grandfathers. She's darker than her parents. The other one got the color genes from the grandmothers. She's lighter than her parents. She's an albino. She's European colored. You got black and white twins in one generation. Now, do I think that happened in one generation? No. I think this happened after Babel populations got separated and they had a different genetic trajectory over time, but they're still people. Now, Charles Darwin said that the white people are superior, not just mentally, but morally. And that one day, all the white people will wipe out all the brown and black and yellow people in the world, because that's how evolution progresses. It has to happen to progress. Oh, I'm so glad that's wrong. Modern genetics has destroyed Darwinism. And one reason why this is important, spiritually and scripturally, is because to be saved, you have to be descended from Adam. You have to be related to Jesus Christ, who's called the kinsman redeemer. If there are people on this earth who are not related to Jesus, they can't be saved. But if all people really do come from Adam and Eve, all people really do come from Noah, then salvation knows no national boundaries. We have a great antidote to racism, and it is raging in America today. The evolutionist does not have an answer. And if you look at evolutionary history, they made the problem worse. There's a lot of other things out there. I mean, I just did, literally, I skipped over a couple things. I probably raised more questions in your mind than you actually had when you started, which is kind of fun. Where do you go for more answers? Well, we got a pile of books and DVDs on the table over there. We have our website, creation.com. There's Creation Magazine, which I would encourage you to look at. We know that even though our website is really popular on the internet, we know more people read Creation Magazine than read our web articles. That's because we print so many. It goes over 100 countries. There's articles in Creation Magazine about radiometric dating. I get to say, hey, Mr. Evolutionist, thank you for inventing carbon dating. That's mine. You can go play with something else. Why? Because we can't find any carbon in the world that doesn't have any carbon-14 in it. That includes amber, dinosaur bones, coal, diamonds, which are supposedly 1 billion years old. If something has carbon-14, it's not more than, at most, 70 or 80,000 years old. Doesn't mean the earth is that old. It means it can't be millions of years old. Here's articles about climate change. You can't talk about climate change without talking about the single greatest episode of climate change in Earth history, Noah's flood, which created an ice age afterwards. Here's an article about why species change, and yet the changes we see are downhill, like the little picture in the top. That's a Galapagos cormorant. I just read a paper last week. They finally found the gene that makes them have mutated wings. They can't fly. That's the types of changes we see downhill. And there's a kids section in the middle of every Creation magazine. We also have a digital version of our magazine. It's really kind of cool. You know, when you go to the store and you see the magazine rack, you know those magazines are free, right? What do they do at the end of the month? They come in there, they tear the front cover off, and they throw the magazine away. How can they do that? Well, because publishers have advertising. The advertising pays all the costs of the shipping and distribution and the production of the magazine, the printing. And so if they don't sell it, they don't lose money. They make money when they sell a magazine. That's the economics of magazine production. Well, we don't have any advertising in Creation Magazine because we want to be free. We don't want an advertiser trying to twist our arm. That's just the way it is. We also want all the pages to be dedicated to equipping our people. But you know, we print like 45 or 50,000 Creation magazines. That's a lot of money. But when we came out with a digital version, we realized, first of all, we don't have to charge people as much because after we pay our artists and our authors, we don't have to print the physical magazine, which is the highest thing. So we drop the cost. And then we say this, if you sign up for the digital magazine, we'll let you share it with anybody you like. We say up to 5 people, but we don't actually count. We'll send you a link in an email. Anyone who clicks on that link will go to our website. It'll open up Creation Magazine, and you can turn the pages on your computer screen or your tablet or your phone even. It's there. Now, it comes out 4 times a year. We work really hard to get it out 4 times a year. If you sign up for a 1-year subscription, though, it might be a couple of months before you get a magazine. So we have a pile of a new issue of a magazine on the tables that you can take with you as a gift. But if you sign up for a 3-year subscription, I'll give you 3 gifts. I'll give you a copy of Creation Magazine, a copy of this talk, The Alternative Creation and Competitive Edge, and How Darwin Got It Wrong, 7 major points, and it wasn't just about science. It's a talk by a dear friend of mine, Dr. John Sanford, who was an atheist for most of his life. He's a world-famous geneticist, absolutely world-famous, who also became a creationist, to the horror of his colleagues. So here's an insider's insider talking about all the things that Darwin got wrong. It's an amazing talk by a very humble person. Here's what our sign-up form looks like. We're going to pass them around as I'm wrapping up. You have to put your address down so we can mail it to you. You have to check off one of those boxes. It should be self-explanatory. And then tear off that little corner piece, take that to the tables, and my volunteers, and I'll be over there also. We'll take care of you over there. All right, guys, they can go out now, and I'm going to give a couple of things, and I'm going to just stop. If you don't know where to start, take a look at our Creation Answers book. That's that red book. We've got a big stack on the table. We wrote that on purpose to answer 99%. Oh, look at that. I said, most people that mess us up, they forget to get them again and switch them, so it's all right. Just roll with it. If you have a thing next to you, would you please pick it up and pass it down your aisle? I'd appreciate that. Okay. The red book, the Creation Answers book, is going to answer 99% of your questions. We wrote it on purpose that way. We have several different packs of books if you want to save a little money. Christianity for Skeptics is an interesting little book. And early on, I talked about skeptics and how our children are being converted to skepticism. This book is a fantastic antidote and will help you wrestle with some of these issues so you can more effectively talk to people who are going down that road. Mitochondrial Eve and the Three Daughters of Noah is a genetics talk of mine where I claim that modern genetics has discovered Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, and the Tower of Babel in the human genome. That was fun. Tonight, I'm going to give a talk very similar to this one, the high-tech cell. I'm going to compare the human genome to a computer, and very quickly we're going to realize that we can't build computers like that because we're not that smart. So come back tonight, 6 o'clock, right? Here's Evolution's Achilles Heels, the book and the DVD. By the way, I don't know if you've seen Is Genesis History? It came out a couple of months ago. That was a fantastic production. We actually didn't make it, but I am one of the people interviewed in it. That became, on Amazon, the #1 selling documentary. A fully Christian, young earth documentary, and the advertisers have noticed. Along with that, Evolution's Achilles Heels was carried in its wake. We cracked into the top 50 for a 2-year-old product. I can't believe that. I'm very happy. It's a really good read and a really good watch. Busting Myths features testimonies of 30 Bible-believing PhD scientists. Don't think that smart people can't get saved. And don't think that scientists can't reject evolution. There's 30 testimonies telling you that's not true. Here's a little book. How did we get our Bible? And is it the Word of God? And how would you know? Where do those 66 books come from? What is inspiration? All those sorts of questions, we answer them right there in that book. But look, I didn't come here to sell you a bunch of books. I came here to tell you how much information we have on the subject. You don't have to be left with no answers. Ask your question, then go find an answer for it. It's there for you, and that's why we're here. All right, I'll leave you with 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you. For a reason for the hope that is in you, do it with gentleness and respect. And I'm going to tell you, a perfectly acceptable answer is, hey, Mr. Aggressive, atheistic, skeptic person, I have no idea what you're talking about. Might as well admit it. But I know where the answer is. I'm going to go to creation.com, and I'm going to come back tomorrow, and we're going to keep on talking. Why is that a good answer? Well, first of all, you're being honest. Second of all, they don't expect you to come back. And third, most people who come to Christ come because a person they know took the time to talk to them. There's one of me. There's, 100, 150 of you. Imagine what would happen in this community if each one of you once this week took time to talk to somebody about faith. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for giving us this amazing world to live in. You didn't have to do that. You could have created a horrible place, but it's a beautiful, wonderful, elegant, and lovely world. Thank you, Father, for giving us the Bible. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to give us a record of where things came from and why they exist and where they're going. You could have left us hanging with no answers to any of this. And yet we have the Bible, and we struggle to believe it, and we struggle to understand it. Help us, Lord, to take the time and the energy to really study your word, to really learn it, and then to really share it with the people around us. And Father, take this little church and bless it to be a light upon a hill. Bless this people to be bold with the gospel and proclaiming your truths to this community in the world that desperately needs to hear it. Because we believe because someone else told us. You use a lot of people to influence us. Bless these people to influence others in turn. And meanwhile, Lord, we're going to go out back into the world and it's going to try to drag us down. Help us to pick up our feet and not drag. Help us to remain focused on you and your Spirit and what you're doing in us and through us. And just, Lord, have mercy.